What if the moral compass you carry as your guide was actually an invisible chain? Nietzsche argued that great value systems weren't born to liberate humanity, but to tame it. What we call virtue often amounts to nothing more than an invention designed to keep us docile, obedient, and predictable. Consider this. How many times have you abandoned a deep desire because a moral voice inside whispered, "That's wrong"? But who placed that voice there? You yourself. Or a society that needs your compliance? Nietzsche didn't want you to become a rebel without cause. He wanted you to see the hidden game, the trick that shapes men and women to live as if they were pieces on a moral chessboard. And once you perceive the trick, the possibility emerges to create your own law, your own life. Are you ready to discover where this prison comes from and how to escape it? If these reflections resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey to the heart of hidden morality. Nietzsche invites us to distrust what seems most solid in our lives: morality. From childhood, we learn to obey rules before understanding their purpose. We grow up hearing phrases like, "This is right," "This is wrong," "Be good," "Don't do that because it's ugly." All this seems natural, as if it were part of reality's fabric. But Nietzsche reveals something disturbing. Morality didn't emerge from universal truth. It's a historical invention, created by men who wanted to control other men. To understand this, Nietzsche makes a powerful distinction: the morality of masters and the morality of slaves. Imagine the first warrior peoples, strong and confident, who didn't need to justify their actions to anyone. For them, good meant vigor, beauty, courage, health, power. There was no guilt for living intensely, but there were also those who were subjugated, weak, resentful, incapable of imposing their will. These, according to Nietzsche, invented a new strategy, transforming their weaknesses into virtues. Thus, the great trick was born. The slave, unable to act like the master, declared that strength was evil, that pleasure was sin, that pride was vanity. In return, he called obedience virtue, humility holiness, submission goodness. It was a silent revolution, a value inversion that changed humanity's course. What was once a sign of life came to be seen as danger, and what was once impotence gained the seal of morality. Nietzsche calls this process transvaluation of values. And it's precisely here that the moral trick reveals itself. The weak, resentful one doesn't defeat the strong with the sword, but by creating a language of guilt and shame. The master, who once acted freely, begins to feel condemned for what made him alive. It's as if a lion were convinced that roaring is sin, that hunting is an offense, and that its own strength is shameful. When we look at our daily lives, we perceive this trick still operating. Think about how many times you've failed to express your strength, desire, or ambition because someone said it was selfishness. How many times you've suppressed the urge to say no because they taught you it was ugly to contradict. Morality isn't just in sacred books or sermons, it's in families' gaze, neighbors' judgment, invisible rules that shape how men and women should behave. Nietzsche shows that morality, far from being a natural path to truth, is a historical strategy of domestication. And most frightening, it's so successful that it no longer needs masters or priests to function. Each person carries within themselves a small guard, a voice that accuses, demands, judges. This is morality's triumph, transforming human beings into their own prison. By understanding this dark origin, we begin to realize that good and evil aren't absolutes. They're interpretations, they're inventions born from power conflicts. The one who seemed weak found a way to survive by dominating the stronger one's conscience. Morality, therefore, isn't a divine gift, but a weapon of war. And if this is true, what does it mean for us today? It means that perhaps many limits we feel aren't actually ours, but echoes of an ancient history created to keep people trapped. It means that what you call guilt might not be your inner voice, but the shadow of an imposed morality. Nietzsche doesn't invite us to throw away all rules, but to see the trick. Only when we see the trap do we have the chance to choose. The question that remains is, how many of your life choices are truly yours, and how many were programmed by a morality born from resentment? The moral trick is that it never presents itself as a trick. It dresses itself as goodness, hides behind beautiful words, and convinces the individual that he's being free precisely when he's obeying. It's obedience transformed into virtue. And perhaps this is the most difficult spell to break, because those who fulfill it don't feel imprisoned. They feel they're doing good. Nietzsche said that values exalted by tradition, humility, purity, renunciation, patience, submission, didn't emerge because they make life more fulfilling, but because they ensure the individual remains predictable, docile, harmless. One who could be a creative, daring force, capable of transforming the world, is domesticated to take pride precisely in his inability to challenge. Being good, in this game, means being harmless. A simple example. From childhood we hear that we shouldn't boast, that pride is a defect. But who benefits from this repression? Who has interest in you not celebrating your achievements? Pride can be arrogance, yes, but it can also be the flame of self-affirmation, recognition of one's own strength. By removing this impulse from us, morality pushes us toward the shadow of obedience. Instead of shining, we learn to hide. Another everyday example is the idea that renunciation is superior to desire. How many times have you heard that denying yourself is a sign of maturity, that sacrifice is nobler than satisfaction? This may sound spiritual, but Nietzsche saw in it a trap. If you convince yourself you shouldn't want, then you accept any imposed condition. If a boss demands overtime, you endure silently, because one must be patient. If a relationship suffocates you, you tolerate it, because true love is renunciation. Desire, which could be an engine of transformation, is discredited as sin or weakness. This trick affects men and women differently, but equally powerfully. Man, for example, is taught to be protector, tireless worker, someone who cannot show fragility. It seems like strength, but it's actually prison. He becomes slave to a role. If he tries to be different, he's accused of failure, lack of virility. Woman is exalted as guardian of purity, obedience, delicacy. Her life is molded to serve, to wait, to care. Thus, both end up bound, not by physical chains, but by ideals they call virtues. Nietzsche wanted us to see this mechanism clearly. When someone tells us be humble, they're actually saying, don't dare too much. When they advise us, be patient, they're often asking, don't question. When they applaud us for being obedient, what they really celebrate is our giving up on living intensely. Of course, Nietzsche didn't defend blind arrogance or brutality. What he challenged was the value inversion that transforms everything vital into sin and everything impotent into virtue. Humility, when born from greatness, can be beautiful, but when imposed as obligation, it becomes poison. Patience, when chosen, can be strength, but when demanded as submission, it's merely servitude. Look at your daily life. How many times have you felt proud of not responding to an injustice, as if that were a sign of maturity? How many times have you silently accepted a limit you could have broken, believing you were being good? The trick is that morality makes you feel proud of your own obedience, as if it were personal achievement, when it's actually surrender. Nietzsche called this process internalization. Instead of being guided by life's instinctive force, we learn to carry a judge within us. This inner voice isn't natural. It was educated, trained, programmed. What you call conscience is often just social morality speaking through your mouth. And why does this trick perpetuate itself? Because it works. A society where everyone takes pride in obeying is stable, predictable, controllable. Nobody revolts, nobody questions, nobody demands too much. And most ingenious, those who obey feel superior to those who dare. The obedient sees himself as righteous, while the rebel is labeled sinner, heretic, criminal. This is the moral trick's victory, transforming prison into virtue and freedom into sin. Nietzsche wanted to tear off this mask. He forces us to ask, is the virtue you carry in your chest really your choice, or was it stuffed into you to make you easier to control? What happens if for an instant you question the value of obedience? This is the wound he opens, not to destroy, but to liberate. The first step isn't rejecting everything, but perceiving. The trick only works while you don't see it. When the curtain falls, you begin to feel that the voice calling your strength selfishness might not be yours, but the voice of centuries of domestication. And then an unsettling question arises. To what extent has your life been guided by virtues that, deep down, are nothing but chains? When Nietzsche speaks of morality as trick, he's not referring to something abstract, distant, but to a mechanism that shapes from early on how men and women live, love, and relate. Morality doesn't just discipline individual bodies and desires, but also writes ready-made roles for each gender, as if life were theatre where everyone must interpret already defined characters. And often, the better we perform these roles, the more imprisoned we become. Man, in this moral theatre, is summoned to be protector, worker, warrior, but at the same time obedient to social and religious norms. It seems like freedom, but isn't. It's duty camouflaged as honor. Man must sacrifice himself for family's good, must be strong even when feeling weak, must carry silent guilts, but never show them. It's as if his life were marked by constant demand. Be useful, be firm, don't deviate from the role we gave you. This morality's danger is that it steals man's possibility of being multiple. By reducing his existence to strength, work, and protection, it removes from him the richness of living his fragilities, desires, and even contradictions. Woman was placed in another role, equally imprisoning, but with softer appearance. Morality made her virtue's guardian. Since ancient times, woman was associated with purity, renunciation, care. Her body was transformed into moral territory. Where man should demonstrate strength, she should demonstrate chastity. Where man was judged by his bravery, she was judged by her obedience. Thus woman became instrument for reproducing the moral system itself, because she was responsible for educating children, transmitting values, enforcing fidelity to norms. Nietzsche saw in this not just external oppression, but a way of colonizing the soul. Man often takes pride in fulfilling his protector role, as if it were his essence. Woman often takes pride in being virtue's guardian, as if she were born for this. The moral trick works when we no longer feel we're acting, but believe we are exactly what the theatre commands us to be. We can observe this theatre in daily life details. Think of the man who works without rest, believing his value depends only on his usefulness, but who never learned to rest without guilt. Think of the woman who suffocates her most intimate desires because she fears being judged, but who simultaneously believes her renunciation is a sign of greatness. Both live roles written by a morality that perpetuates itself in silences, gazes, subtle judgments. Nietzsche didn't say man should abandon his strength or woman should despise care. What he questioned was the unique imposition of these roles as inevitable destiny. Morality transforms possible virtues into obligatory prisons. When strength is demanded as law, man loses freedom to be fragile. When purity is demanded as law, woman loses freedom to be desire. The issue isn't denying these dimensions, but freeing them from moral obligation. And here appears a crucial point: how these roles reinforce each other mutually. Man learns he must be protector and for this needs woman to be the protected. Woman learns she must be virtue's guardian and for this needs man to be order's guardian. Each becomes the other's prisoner, believing they're living natural complementarity when they're actually just representing inherited script. Nietzsche called this process collective staging. It's not just the individual interpreting the role, it's all society applauding or punishing according to fidelity to the character. When a man decides not to be traditional provider, he's soon criticized as weak or irresponsible. When a woman decides to follow her desires, she's soon labeled immoral. It's the theater audience demanding each actor maintain the script. The problem is that the more we fulfill these roles, the more distant we become from authenticity. Man, by molding himself only through duty, loses the possibility of creating new meanings for his life. Woman, by molding herself only through virtue, loses the possibility of affirming her own potency. Both become characters, and real life escapes through the stage's cracks. Nietzsche provokes us to ask what exists in us beyond the role we inherited. What would become of man if he could free himself from the obligation to be only strong? What would become of woman if she could free herself from the obligation to be only virtuous? Perhaps both would discover there's more truth in repressed desire than in fulfilled duty. Perhaps they'd realize that morality, by imposing fixed roles, prevents us from experiencing existence's richness in its fullness. The moral theater isn't eternal, it exists while we believe in it. But to break the spell, courage is needed. Courage to challenge gazes, to bear disapproval, to abandon obedience's easy applause. And perhaps this is Nietzsche's greatest lesson. Life doesn't ask us to represent, but to create. The question that remains is inevitable. Have you lived as author of your own story, or merely as actor in morality's theater? If morality is a trick, why do we continue obeying it, even when we begin to suspect it? Why do so many men and women prefer to remain in obedience's chains instead of risking creation of their own life? Nietzsche would say, the greatest obstacle to liberation isn't morality's force itself, but the fear we feel before freedom. Freedom seems a luminous promise, but in reality it's an abyss. It means there's no longer a ready manual, no authority to turn to. The choices fall entirely upon us. For many, this is unbearable. Morality offers security. It says what's right and wrong, provides rules, guides steps, reduces uncertainty. And it's precisely because of this that even perceiving these rules imprison us, we continue following them. It's easier to bear prison than face decisions void. Nietzsche saw guilt as the main instrument for maintaining this fear. Guilt is a mechanism that keeps us tied to the past, constantly reminding us of our faults, as if we were in eternal debt. How many times have you felt guilt, not just for what you did, but even for what you desired? How many times didn't you dare follow an impulse because immediately an inner voice accused you? This is morality's triumph, colonizing even our thoughts, punishing even our intentions. And guilt always walks hand in hand with need for social approval. We're social beings, we need recognition, and morality exploits this need. When you follow the role given to you, you're applauded, called good son, good mother, good worker, good wife. But when you dare break the script, what comes is silence, judgment, rejection. Few bear this solitude. Thus we prefer the comfort of being accepted to the risk of being authentic. Think of common situations. The person who remains in a job they hate because they fear disappointing family, or the individual who silences their affective desires because they fear neighbors' opinion. Think of the woman who dreams of more freedom, but shrinks to avoid being seen as selfish. Think of the man who would like to explore his sensitivity, but stays silent to avoid being called weak. It's not physical chains that bind them, but fear of disapproval, fear of solitude that accompanies those who decide to live for themselves. Nietzsche called this attachment to morality's security herd morality. The herd moves together toward what everyone says is correct, and whoever strays risks being devoured. But the price of following the herd is never knowing one's own strength. Deep down, what scares us about freedom isn't just the possibility of error, but discovering that nobody besides ourselves is responsible for our life's meaning. And yet, Nietzsche shows us that it's in this risk that life reveals itself. Fear of freedom is fear of creating, fear of affirming oneself as source of values. When we break with inherited morality, it doesn't mean we're left rudderless. It means we become authors of our own course. But for this, one must bear initial anguish, silence of applause, solitude of those who rise against centuries of conditioning. This courage isn't reserved for distant heroes. It begins in simple, everyday gestures, saying no when they expect your yes, assuming a desire they told you was improper, abandoning a role that weighs on you. Each time you dare, even in small doses, you taste freedom. And gradually, fear gives way to discovering that living for oneself is richer, truer, more intense than living to please. Nietzsche knew most would prefer to remain imprisoned because prison is comfortable. But he also knew some would have courage to throw themselves into freedom's abyss. These few don't seek approval, but creation. They don't follow a manual, but write their own life. The question that remains is, are you willing to carry the weight of your own freedom, or will you continue delivering your life to the comfort of rules others invented? Nietzsche doesn't leave us only before morality's critique. He didn't want us to stop at deconstruction, trapped in bitter realization that we've been domesticated. What he proposes is something infinitely bolder, creating new values. To this movement, he gave the name transvaluation. To transvaluate means inverting the gaze. If for centuries we were taught to call virtue what diminishes life and sin what intensifies it, Nietzsche invites us to put words back in their place. It's like cleaning a fogged lens. What once seemed wrong may reveal itself as vital force. What once seemed noble may show itself as merely disguised cowardice. Transvaluation isn't just critique, it's creation. But how can this manifest in daily life? Think, for example, of the idea of pride. For centuries it was pointed to as one of the worst sins, and indeed, pride can become empty vanity, armor against the world. But it can also be affirmation, consciousness of one's own strength, refusal to shrink. Transvaluating means rescuing this second meaning and allowing it to be source of creative energy. Another example, desire. How many times have you learned that desiring is wrong, that body is soul's enemy, that pleasure is sin? This morality, as we've seen, was born from the weak's resentment against the strong. Transvaluating means returning dignity to desire, recognizing it not as threat, but as life's fundamental impulse. A man or woman who allows themselves to desire without guilt discovers forgotten potency, the joy of existing. Transvaluation demands courage because there's no external guarantee. When you decide to create your own values, you can no longer hide behind traditions, dogmas, or ready rules. It's like walking on unknown land. But it's precisely this risk that opens the possibility of authenticity. With each step, you ask yourself, does this value make me grow? Does this principle intensify or diminish my life? Inherited morality disappears, and the challenge emerges to respond from oneself. Nietzsche knew this wasn't a task for everyone. Most will prefer herd morality security, but those who dare to become creators will feel something obedience never provides, the tragic joy of living without guarantees, but with intensity. It's like trading cage for storm. Inside the cage, there's food and protection, but also monotony and emptiness. In the storm, there's risk and pain, but also movement, creation, discovery. Transvaluation begins in small choices. You can ask yourself, why do I continue this job that empties me? Is it because I believe it's right, or because I fear the judgment of leaving? You can ask yourself, why do I accept this relationship that nullifies me? Is it because it's love, or because they taught me I must endure in virtue's name? Each time you place life as measure and not morality, you practice transvaluation. Nietzsche saw in this the beginning of the path toward the overman, one who not only obeys nor only revolts, but creates. Creating new values doesn't mean living without principles, but choosing principles born from life's affirmation, not fear of it. The overman is one who says yes to existence, even in its pains, because he recognizes that living is richer than eternally protecting oneself. This vision isn't easy. Transvaluating implies often facing solitude, bearing disapproving gazes, abandoning roles that brought recognition. But in return it offers something no applause can give, the sensation of being author of one's own life. It's the instant when you realize you don't need permission to exist as you desire, because the only legitimate authority over your life is yourself. And deep down, transvaluation is also an act of love. Not sentimental love, but love for one's own existence. Loving life to the point of not wanting to reduce it to inherited commandments. Loving life to the point of risking creation. This love is true overcoming of the moral trick. Nietzsche leaves us before a choice: continue trapped in inherited morality, repeating roles written by others, or dare transvaluation, creating a life that springs from our own strength. The question is, do you prefer the security of the already trodden path or the creative vertigo of inventing your own values? After unmasking morality's dark origin, seeing the trick of obedience disguised as virtue, understanding the roles men and women were forced to perform, and facing freedom's fear, the decisive question remains: what comes after? How to live beyond the moral prison? Nietzsche doesn't offer us a ready recipe. He never wrote a conduct manual. On the contrary, his philosophy is an invitation for each to become creator of their own life. Living beyond the moral prison means daring to be author, not just actor. It's abandoning the role written by centuries of traditions and assuming the risk of writing one's own script. This path begins with a change of gaze. Instead of asking, what is right, the human being who liberates himself asks, what intensifies life in me? Instead of worrying about inherited commandments, he measures his acts by the criterion of potency, creation, expansion. It's not about living without limits, but substituting blind obedience with responsibility to create values that truly affirm existence. Imagine someone who decides to break with a suffocating relationship, not because morality says it's permitted, but because he recognizes that there his life is being diminished. Imagine another who chooses to change careers, even against all expectations, because he feels only thus can he realize his creative force. These gestures aren't born from obedience, but from courage to affirm oneself against inherited morality. Nietzsche called this new horizon overman. It's not a superior being in biological sense, but one who broke the chains of resentment and guilt. The overman doesn't live to please, nor to be accepted, nor to accumulate applause. He lives to create. His life is artwork, not copy. He transforms even suffering into growth material because he recognizes that living is also crossing pain, losses, and contradictions. But how to recognize if we've already begun treading this path? Perhaps through subtle signs of authenticity, when a deep desire overcomes fear of judgment, when courage to say no surpasses temptation to stay silent, when joy of being who one is weighs more than need to please. Each small act of affirmation opens space for constructing a free life. Nietzsche also alerts us to a danger. It's not enough to merely deny old values. The nihilist, one who only rejects, is still trapped by what he rejects. He lives in morality's shadow, like one who shouts against it but continues depending on it. The true creator isn't one who destroys, but one who plants. Transvaluating isn't just toppling idols, it's raising new values from one's own life's soil. This process is demanding because it forces us to face solitude. The human being beyond the moral prison no longer guides himself by easy applause, and therefore may seem strange, incomprehensible, even dangerous to the herd's eyes. But it's in this strangeness that true freedom is found. Authenticity's price is high, but the value of life lived in fullness is even greater. Deep down, Nietzsche believed each of us carries this possibility. We're not eternally destined to obey. Within each individual exists a creative force that can be awakened. This force can manifest in art, work, love, in daily life's simplest choices. The important thing is that it's born from within, not from obedience to inherited code. The human being beyond the moral prison isn't perfect. He errs, stumbles, begins again. But he lives, and by living, he transforms himself and the world around him. His greatest gesture of courage isn't being infallible, but not hiding behind ready rules. It's assuming life in its tragedy and beauty, saying a great yes to existence. And perhaps this is the final message. Don't wait for distant future, nor for ideal society. Liberation begins now, in each decision, in each act where you choose to live from your potency and not from inherited morality. The prison is ancient, but the key was always in your hands. The question that remains is inevitable. Will you continue representing in morality's theater, or dare to be creator of your own life? Throughout this journey, we've seen how Nietzsche revealed that morality wasn't born to liberate us, but to domesticate us. We discovered the trick of obedience, disguised as virtue, understood how men and women were imprisoned in inherited roles, explored freedom's fear, and reached the supreme invitation of transvaluation, creating new values, living beyond the moral prison. Now the reflection is yours. What was the moral belief that most imprisoned you until today? Write in the comments from where you're watching us, share your vision, and let's build together this reflection community. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring Nietzsche's thought abysses and heights. Thank you so much for being here. Philosophy becomes more alive when shared.